All right, let's say we've got certain items that we have in our budget. We've allocated certain costs to them per unit, and we've got a subtotal. We've added a 5% contingency on them, and we've got a total with 5% margin on them as well. So let's just minimize the GST section. That doesn't concern us. Now, we in the next video, I'll discuss how the dependencies work and how does the Gantt chart come into picture, all of that. But I wanted to explain this section that we have a start date and we have an end date. But on top of that, we have a billing cycle and we have a payment span. And what the billing cycle does is that whatever our end date for that item to finish is going to be, let's say it finishes on 15th of April or whatever. And if your billing cycle is, let's say, 30 days from whatever day you get your invoice from, that's how this will get added to it, so that that amount is then used to generate the cash flow. So if I was to press this button, generate cash flow, without having any start date or any end date, this is going to give me an error right at the bottom. So make sure that you don't do that. And we'll try and get some like a message or something where, unless you've got any start dates or end date, it cannot generate cash flow, because the cash flow does not know when do you actually start and when do you actually finish. So in order to be able to generate that cash flow, you always have to have something in your work days, because that will determine when you're going to start and when you're going to end. So if let's say it's just a once-off invoice, it's going to be that work is going to happen, within one day. So all I have to do is put in one over there. At this stage, there is no predecessor and there is no lag with this. Now, this first column, which is the first start date of every section, is going to come out a little bit with a red shading, and it is with a purpose, because you always have to have a date in here. Now, the first time when you start to generate this thing, you have to make sure that this first date is never before the start date of your project. So whatever start date you've got in there, let's say you've got 2nd of March, and I want the same 2nd of March over here. So I'll just put 2nd MAR-20. And all this does is it tells me that, okay, the first date has to be exactly the same as that, or later than this date. So you can't start a cash flow for a project whose start date is 2nd of March. So you can't have 1st of March in there, or you can't have any date in 1st of February or 15th of February 2020 in there, because that date has to be either the same date that we've got here, and then. So now when I've got, this is going to be a one-time thing, and at least I've got at least one date in here. Now when I press the generate cash flow, it will generate it. But if I've got no dates in here, it will not generate. Another thing, because I've got totals over on this side, what's going to happen is it's going to show me an error. So let's see what happens when I click on generate cash flow. So it's gonna go and dynamically it's gonna go and dynamically generate these columns and distribute whatever cash that we had over here based on all of this. Now, it has Gantt chart functionality built into it, but I'll jump into that in a second. But in this section, I want to talk about the cash flow side of things. So what's happening here is that you put in that it's going to take one work day to complete this task, and the cost of the task is going to be whatever you've got in there. And once you've got your start date, that means it's going to start on the same day and finish on the same day, and that means one working day. And then you put in your billing cycle, which is 30 days. That means it works out 30 days. Now, if you don't want to use this, there's no problem whatsoever. You can turn that to 0, or you can simply delete it. So if you deleted that column, what happens when you delete it or make it 0? It is automatically going to pick up the first day of the next month. But if you want this thing to be paid within the month of March itself, just put 1 in there. And what it is going to do is going to basically assume, for cash flow purposes, it is going to assume that it's getting paid the next day. So that's when the next payment is due. And if it's a single payment, it'll put in one. And if you feel that you're going to get a progress claim and there are going to be 2 split payments or something, you can put that in there if you wanted to. Or if you wanted to plan your cash flow better, you could put in 30 days or 15 days. But if you put in 15 days, it still won't make any difference. It will still get due within the next 15 days. But if you leave it as if you delete this section completely, it picks up the first day of the next month automatically. If you add 15 days, 30 days, 45 days, for example, what it is going to do, it's going to calculate the date for April, and based on this cash flow, it is still getting paid in April. So you can change these dates. It's no problem whatsoever. So let's just quickly add a few things. So let's say this is one hire item. Let's say this is going to take me 2 days for this thing, but this can only go in, let's say, if this task is already completed. Now there is a dependency here, and we'll talk about it much later, but let's just say this is dependent upon finishing builder's clean. So all I have to do is under predecessor, I have to look at this row number, which is 6. Now this is the spreadsheet row numbers, so there aren't any numbers otherwise. So I'll just put in 6, that this work can start after that starts. And I'll just put in 0, or I'll just delete this section. It automatically means that it's gonna get paid the next month, and there's gonna be a single payment, or I could say that there's gonna be 3 different payments. And now when I press generate cash flow, it is going to do a total and distribute this cash flow across the timeline. Now this section here says okay, and this one here says error. And the reason for that is that your total here does not match the total that you've distributed across your cash flow. So always make sure that you've got, because over here we've allocated all these costs, and I have a running total for 38,000 for hire items. However, I've got no cash flow on this side. So let's quickly just add for every item that we've got. Let's say it's going to take 1 day. This one's going to take 7 days. This one going to take 15 days. I'm just putting in some values. This is so that the task is going to take X amount of days to complete. And in here, let's just say this is going to take 50 days. And in your light rubbish gauge hire or the tools or whatever, let's just say it's going to take 1 day. And see the next section again, this is blank. It is blank because you either need to add this thing manually. So whenever do you think the hire items are going to start? If you have a manual date, you can put that in. But if you want to use this based on when any of these items are finishing, all you have to do is look at, this is row number 10. And if you put under predecessor, you put number 10, the date automatically gets picked up from the end date of that. So whatever the next working day after 4th of March is going to be, that's the date we're going to start, and all the dates automatically get updated. In here, I've left these as blank. That means automatically they're going to get paid in August. With some of them, I'm going to pay the next day, which is, I want them to be paid in the same month. And in here, I know that with this supplier, maybe I've got, 60-day account or something like that. So if I put 60 days over here, then those dates will get updated automatically. And you have to give it a few seconds because all this runs via a script. And once you've got all those things, you just press generate cash flow, and it will generate your cash flow and distribute everything. And now you see that this is telling you that everything that you've allowed here as your total costs is the same. The total that we've distributed across the timeline is exactly the same. And in the next video, we'll talk about all the Gantt chart functionalities that are already built in here.